Alright guys, so by day 2 or day 3, we'll have to start being really careful about the dry times on this clay. If it gets too dry, we'll lose the ability to work with it. If it's too wet, we're also not going to be able to work with it, but as it continues to dry, we'll be able to get more and more detail carved into this thing. And it doesn't really even matter whether you've decided to go with, one of these traditional patterns, whether you're doing some text work, or whether you're doing, something that's one of your own illustrations. What I want you to really think about is sort of a general sculpture maxim that you work big to small, right? Today we're going to knock out some big things, and then over time, as the clay gets harder and harder and harder, it holds more detail, we can get more and more precise with it. And when I talk about precision, think about too, like in a relief carving, you can get an incredible amount of detail into your clay. The coins that I used in the lecture the other day are a really great example, right? Just take a coin out of your pocket and take a close look at how much detail is in the relief. This is a American or U.S. silver dollar, right? But just amazing amount of detail carved into and then later stamped into the metal that makes these coins. Your carving can and should have that same kind of detail. Another thing I want you to think about too is I want you to have layers to your design. It should have a background, a middle ground, and a foreground. Like, how are you going to work with that? In this example, again, right, like these things look like they kind of dive and weave underneath each other. So how would your design sort of have that kind of play? Well, I'm going to work up this one as an example. As I was doing my demonstration for the previous video, I made the mistake of leaving the paper sitting on the clay, so it really messed up my template. So I had to print another one. Oh well. I'm going to use this other one for something else now, but remember in the previous video I used a pencil and traced these lines in, and you can see how I just kind of very lightly have them lined up on the clay itself. Now you've got a couple options if you're doing a pattern like this, is you could then work back in and make them slightly deeper with the cap, right, and kind of line those all up. I'm going to keep this cap handy. I'm not going to get rid of it, but I'm not going to use it to make all of my lines, because honestly I don't need all of those circular lines. In fact, I only need one of these sort of three-edged or three-cornered pieces. So I'm going to make a little bit stiffer template out of that by backing this piece of paper with some cardboard. But even if you're doing text, right, the same thing sort of applies. You lay your handwritten text on top, draw that into your clay so that it makes a light indentation, and then you can work back into the clay with your tools. For now, I think what I'll probably do is I'll use some glue to glue a little cardboard onto the back of this piece of printout here, because all I really need is one halfway decent sort of stiffened version of this guy. The glue that you could use for that kind of work could be a glue stick. If you've got it handy, go for it. Use some spray adhesive, but I'm just going to use some PVA glue I have handy, because it'll work really quickly for this demonstration. I'm going to apply the PVA glue right to the back of the paper. The PVA glue is really handy because it dries so quickly. I got to get it down really fast. And then depending on the thickness of the material that you might be using for your template, you might be able to cut the cardboard with the scissors. This is just a piece of scrap mail that came through the thing, so it's probably a little thick for doing scissors work. I might just actually use an X-Acto blade to cut that out. Precision matters when you're working on these templates, but keep in mind that clay is sort of an imprecise material on some level, so even though we'll be able to make incredibly precise pieces, incredibly precise carvings, when you're working on your templates, if they're not exactly like computer software accurate, don't really sweat it too much. Okay, so having one of these little guys will be very, very handy. I'm going to keep this guy around for reference, but now I have sort of one of the small building block pieces that I can work on the rest of this piece here. And what I'll do probably over the next couple of days is a slow process of working sort of big to small, making sure, one, I know exactly where each one of my sort of three-cornered pieces is. Two, maybe figuring out where the edges of the tile are on my piece and then removing any extra clay I don't need. Maybe three, finding out which parts of the clay tile are going to actually be sort of through and through or cut out pieces, and I'll mark those. And then eventually I'll actually start cutting down into the grooves. But notice I didn't say I was going to cut those grooves out on day one. That's because that's a fairly small thing. A much bigger thing will be determining where the outer edges of the clay is. Keep in mind that, we'll only really be able to cut this clay easily fairly early, maybe, this week. If you wait until next week, 2 or 3 days in to this piece, it'll be too dry to do those big cuts. So this would be a great opportunity for you to use the cutting tools that you made on our previous videos. I'm going to probably make a whole lot of use out of a chisel tool, but it's very possible that, depending on the detail in your design, you may need to come up with a few more tools or a few different things to work with. So I can continue working here and just kind of blocking it in, but what I would like for you guys to be able to do is get about 1 or 2 days into this piece, and I'll work through on a couple of, or I'll work through on a few examples on this one, and I'll kind of pause periodically to show it to you. But one really critical thing I want to show you before the end of this tutorial is it's probably a really great idea to get this slab up off the canvas board and prevent it from getting any drier. So I'm going to use that credit card again, because it might be stuck just a little bit to the canvas, and I'm going to be very careful not to bend this piece. It's really important to keep that tile pretty flat. And I'm going to put a layer of plastic down now. This will prevent the clay from getting any drier underneath, but because I don't have a sheet of plastic now, I'll use my bin as a way to cover up the outside of the piece. Now, it's possible that your clay won't fit inside of the bin. That's going to be a problem. It's also possible that your bin hangs over the edge of your board. Now, that is going to be a bit of a problem. So keep in mind that any air that gets into your bin is going to continue to dry your piece out. If you want to, if you have an extra piece of plastic laying around and you want to tent your plastic so you've got it sort of sandwiched in between, that's probably an even better way to keep your clay from drying out, especially overnight or over the long weekend. I suggest working on this piece a little bit every day. If you have a long stretch of time, you might be able to dry it out just a little bit, work a little more, dry it out, work a little more, dry it out. But for most of us, this will be kind of a once a day sort of exercise.